Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about George Washington, not the stony-faced guy on the dollar bill, but the actual human being who lived and breathed and had a real life. The guy who secretly wrote love letters to a married woman while engaged to someone else. The guy who made whiskey and grew hemp. The real George. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot, take a nice slow breath and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're heading back to 18th century Virginia, and trust me, you're going to be real grateful for that mattress by the time we're done, so congratulations. You just woke up in 1759 Virginia. It's early morning and you're lying on a lumpy feather mattress. Unlike the stories you've heard, it's not rough wool against your skin, but linen. Soft, well-worn linen sheets that have been washed hundreds of times in lye soap. The mattress beneath you isn't exactly memory foam. It's stuffed with goose feathers that have all shifted to one side during the night. Your nose twitches at the competing smells. Wood smoke from the hearth that's been burning all night, the faint musty scent of the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, and somewhere the smell of fresh bread baking, probably cornbread, maybe biscuits if you're lucky. Outside, you hear the low murmur of voices, workers heading to the fields, the distant neigh of horses, a rooster announcing his importance to everyone who'll listen, and something else, the sound of a man's boots on the wooden floor coming closer. His hair isn't white yet, it's reddish-brown, pulled back in a simple queue, and he's looking right at you. "Good morning," he says, his voice deeper than you expected. "Martha's still asleep. Would you care to join me for a ride around the property?" And just like that, you're being invited to spend the morning with George Washington at his home, Mount Vernon. Now, the good news is you've arrived at an interesting moment. George and Martha Washington have only been married for a few months. They tied the knot on January 6th, 1759, and it's now spring. The newlyweds are settling into their life together at Mount Vernon, the estate George inherited from his half-brother Lawrence. The bad news? It's 1759, which means no indoor plumbing, no electricity, and definitely no air conditioning. Virginia summers are brutal, and they're coming. More good news, though. You've caught George at a happy time in his life. The French and Indian War is over. He's not yet involved in the Revolution. He's just married the wealthiest widow in Virginia, and he's focusing on being a plantation owner, a stepfather to Martha's 2 children, and making Mount Vernon into the impressive estate he's always dreamed of. You pull on some clothes, thankfully someone has left you period-appropriate attire, and follow George outside. Mount Vernon in 1759 isn't yet the grand mansion it will eventually become. George is in the early stages of expanding it. Right now, it's a modest but respectable house on a bluff overlooking the Potomac River. The view is spectacular. The wide river glitters in the morning sun, and beyond it, the Maryland shore is a line of deep green forest. "I plan to add a second story," George tells you as you walk toward the stables, "and wings on either side. It should be a home worthy of Martha's position in society." There's something in his voice when he says Martha's name. Respect, certainly. But is it love? That's one of the big questions about George and Martha Washington. Did they love each other, or was theirs a marriage of convenience? You think about what you know. George had written those romantic letters to Sally Fairfax, the wife of his friend George William Fairfax, right before he married Martha. In one, dated September 12th, 1758, he told Sally that he remained devoted to her and spoke of the force of her amiable beauties in the recollection of 1,000 tender passages. Pretty steamy stuff for the 18th century. But then he went and married Martha just a few months later. Martha Dandridge Custis, a 27-year-old widow with 2 young children and a massive fortune. Her first husband, Daniel Park Custis, had been one of the wealthiest men in Virginia, and when he died in 1757, he left everything to Martha. George leads you to the stables, where a groom has already saddled 2 horses. George's horse is a magnificent bay named Blueskin. Yours is a gentle mare. "I trust you can ride?" George asks, eyeing you with that penetrating gaze. You nod, hoping your 21st century self can manage an 18th century saddle. As you both mount up, you can't help but notice how natural George looks on horseback. Thomas Jefferson would later call him the best horseman of his age, and it's easy to see why. He sits straight-backed but relaxed, moving with the animal as if they're one being. As you ride out across the plantation, George points out the fields where his workers, many of them enslaved, are already busy with spring planting. He talks about crop rotation and soil management with surprising passion. This isn't just business to him, it's a genuine interest. "I've been reading the latest agricultural treatises from England," he tells you. "There are methods to prevent soil exhaustion that many planters here ignore. Short-term thinking. George Washington, it turns out, is a nerd about farming. He's constantly experimenting with new crops, new techniques, new tools. Mount Vernon is his laboratory." You ride for about an hour, making a circuit of the main plantation. George knows every inch of his land. He greets workers by name, both free and enslaved. He stops to inspect fences, check on new plantings, and make notes in a small book he carries. On the way back to the house, you can't help but ask him about Martha. "You seem very focused on improving Mount Vernon," you say carefully. "Is your wife equally enthusiastic about these projects?" George gives you a measured look. He's not a man who readily shares his feelings, you realize. He considers his words carefully before speaking. "Mrs. Washington is an excellent partner," he says finally. "She understands the responsibilities of our position and manages the household affairs with great skill. The children adore her, as does everyone who knows her." It's a diplomatic answer, not a romantic one. But there's warmth in his voice. Back at the house, you finally meet Martha Washington. She's not what you expected. Paintings and descriptions of her aren't particularly flattering, but in person she has a lively energy and bright, intelligent eyes. She's short, barely 5 feet tall compared to George's towering height, but she moves with purpose and authority. "There you are, George," she says as you both enter the dining room. "I was beginning to think you'd ridden all the way to Williamsburg." There's an easy familiarity between them. Not passionate romance, perhaps, but something that seems like genuine affection and respect. Breakfast is served by an enslaved man named Frank Lee, and it's substantial. Ham, eggs, cornbread, preserved fruits. Martha efficiently manages the serving while also making sure her 2 children, Jackie, 6, and Patsy, 4, mind their manners. The children are clearly used to having their stepfather at the table now, though they still call him Colonel Washington rather than anything more familiar. George is polite with them, but not especially warm. He seems a bit unsure of how to interact with children, especially such young ones. After breakfast, George excuses himself to meet with his farm manager, and Martha invites you to join her in the little parlour where she does her morning work. The room is cosy, with windows overlooking the garden. Martha sits at a small desk, sorting through correspondence and household accounts. A maid, also enslaved, sits nearby with sewing work. "George is always in motion," Martha says, with a fond smile. "From dawn until dusk he must see everything, know everything happening on the plantation. I've never known a man with such energy." You ask her how they met. "It was arranged through mutual acquaintances," she says, focusing on her paperwork. "After my period of mourning for Mr. Custis was complete, of course, Colonel Washington called upon me at my home. He was very impressive." A slight blush colours her cheeks. So tall, so distinguished in his uniform, and with such a reputation from the war. Was it a difficult decision to marry again, you ask? Martha puts down her pen and looks at you directly. "I had 2 small children to consider, and while Mr. Custis left me well provided for, a plantation requires a master's hand. The colonel is an excellent manager, and—" She hesitates. "He is a kind man beneath his reserve. I believe we suit each other well." It's not a declaration of passionate love, but there's genuine affection in her voice, and something else, pride. She's proud to be Mrs. Washington. The morning passes pleasantly. You watch as Martha efficiently manages the household, giving instructions to the house slaves, checking on the kitchen preparations, reviewing the children's lessons with their tutor. She's like a CEO of a small company, handling dozens of details with calm competence. George returns for the midday meal, bringing news from around the plantation. The couple discusses the details together. Crop prospects, repairs needed, supplies to be ordered. It's a business partnership as much as a marriage, you realise, but one based on mutual respect. After the meal, while George returns to his outdoor work, Martha shows you around the house. It's comfortable, but not yet the showplace it will become. George is clearly spending money on improvements, but Martha's touch is evident in the practical comforts. Good furniture arranged for conversation, windows positioned to catch the breeze, flowers from the garden brightening the rooms. In the children's room, Martha softens visibly. Patsy and Jackie are her world. She shows you their toys, some expensive items ordered from London, alongside simpler handmade dolls and wooden soldiers. "George ordered these for them," she says, indicating a set of painted wooden animals. "He's trying so hard with them." Her expression is tender. "It's not easy for him. He never had children of his own, you know." This is something you hadn't fully considered. George and Martha will never have children together. Some historians believe the smallpox George contracted as a young man may have left him sterile. Whatever the reason, the Washingtons will raise Martha's children as their own, and later, after Jackie's untimely death, they'll raise 2 of his children as well. As the afternoon wears on, you find yourself sitting with Martha on the small porch that overlooks the Potomac. The view is stunning, and a pleasant breeze keeps the spring warmth from becoming uncomfortable. "George loves this view," Martha says, following your gaze to the river. "Sometimes I find him just standing here, looking out at the water. I think he finds peace in it." You think about the George Washington you learned about in school, the stern-faced general, the dignified president. It's hard to reconcile that image with this younger man, passionate about farming and creating a beautiful home. "He carries so much responsibility," Martha continues softly. "Even now, when we're meant to be simply plantation owners, people look to him, expect things from him. Letters come every week asking for his opinion on political matters. He can't seem to escape public life, even here." She glances at you, a knowing look in her eyes. "It will only get worse, I fear. These troubles with England. George feels strongly about them. I worry that he'll be drawn back into public service." Little does she know that in 16 years her husband will be named Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, beginning an 8-year separation during the Revolutionary War, and after that he'll become the first President of the United States, thrusting both of them firmly into the public eye for 8 more years. But for now, in this peaceful spring of 1759, they're just George and Martha Washington, newlyweds creating a life together at Mount Vernon. The sun begins to lower toward the horizon, casting a golden light across the lawns. In the distance, you can see George riding back toward the house, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "He'll be tired and dusty," Martha says with a smile, rising from her chair, "and hungry as a bear. I should check on dinner preparations." You follow her inside, watching as she efficiently directs the household staff, making sure everything is perfect for her husband's return. There's a tenderness in her efficiency, you notice. She genuinely wants his comfort, his happiness. And when George enters, dusty and tired as predicted, his face brightens visibly at the sight of his wife. He may have written passionate letters to Sally Fairfax, but the look he gives Martha is one of real affection and appreciation. "Everything in order?" Martha asks him, handing him a glass of his favourite Madeira wine. "All in hand," he confirms, accepting the glass with a grateful nod. The new field is nearly ready for planting. They move together into the dining room, a well-matched pair despite their physical differences. He towers over her, but she fills the room with her presence just as much as he does. You realise that whatever brought them together, convenience, social standing, practical considerations, they formed a genuine partnership. They respect each other. They care for each other. They're building something together. As you settle into your chair at the dinner table, feeling the weight of the day's explorations, you can't help but appreciate this glimpse into the private lives of two people who will help shape a nation. They don't know what's coming. The war, the presidency, their place in history. Right now, they're just George and Martha, hosting you for dinner at their beloved Mount Vernon. The candles flicker on the table, casting warm light on the faces around you. Outside, the Potomac gleams silver in the fading light. The gentle murmur of conversation fills the room. You sink a little deeper into your chair, feeling your shoulders relax, your breathing slow. That's it. Nice and easy. Just like that. Settling into this moment in time, where tomorrow George Washington will wake with the dawn and continue building the life he envisions with Martha at his side, neither of them knowing the extraordinary journey that awaits as history unfolds around them. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows across the dining room as you continue your evening with the Washingtons. George has loosened up a bit after his glass of Madeira. His formal reserve isn't completely gone, that's just who he is. But there's a warmth to him now that wasn't there earlier in the day. "Tell me about your whiskey distillery," you say, knowing that in later years, Washington will become one of America's most successful whiskey producers. George looks surprised, but pleased by your interest. "Distillery? I'm afraid you're mistaken. I've considered such an enterprise, but haven't yet established one." Of course, you've jumped ahead in time. In 1759, George Washington isn't yet the whiskey tycoon he'll become after his presidency. That won't happen until the 1790s. "Perhaps you're thinking of my grist mill," he continues. "I do have plans to expand our milling operations." Martha gives her husband an indulgent smile. George is always planning something. If it's not the mill, it's a new field to be cleared or a new wing for the house. "A man must look to the future, my dear," George responds, but there's no defensiveness in his tone. It's clearly a familiar, comfortable exchange between them. You notice how George's eyes linger on Martha with genuine affection. Whatever his feelings might have been for Sally Fairfax, he seems to have developed real fondness for his wife. After dinner, you move to the parlour where Jackie and Patsy join you for a short time before their bedtime. George is somewhat stiff with the children, but he makes an effort. He shows Jackie a small wooden model of a plough he's considering purchasing, explaining how it works, with surprising patience. Martha watches them together, her expression soft. When it's time for the children to go to bed, she takes them upstairs herself rather than sending them with a servant. While she's gone, George relaxes into his chair with another glass of Madeira. The firelight softens the angles of his face, making him look younger than his 27 years. "I never expected to be a father," he admits, staring into his glass, certainly not to children already so formed in their ways. It's challenging. You're seeing a rare, vulnerable moment from a man history remembers as almost impossibly stoic. "But they're good children," he continues, "and their mother..." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Martha is everything a man could want in a wife. Sensible, capable, kind." It's not a passionate declaration of love, but for a man of his time and temperament, it's revealing. George Washington doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve, but there's genuine respect and affection in his voice when he speaks of Martha. Martha returns, and the conversation shifts to lighter topics. You learn that George loves fox hunting and keeps a pack of hounds specially bred for the purpose. Martha teases him about his enthusiasm for dancing, revealing that he'll often ride significant distances to attend a ball. "He may appear serious," she tells you with a conspiratorial smile, "but my husband cuts quite a figure on the dance floor. The ladies all remark upon it." George looks embarrassed but pleased by his wife's praise. "I merely enjoy the exercise," he demurs, but there's a twinkle in his eye. As the evening winds down, Martha invites you to join them for breakfast the following morning. "George rises with the sun," she warns, "but the rest of us keep more reasonable hours." You retire to your guest room where someone has thoughtfully warmed the sheets with a bed warmer. The feather mattress feels more comfortable now that you're truly tired. Through the window you can see the moon reflecting on the Potomac. The gentle sounds of the house settling and the distant call of night birds lull you into a peaceful sleep. Morning comes with the first light of dawn. As Martha predicted, George is already up and about when you make your way downstairs. He's just returning from his morning ride, his cheeks ruddy from the early spring air. "Ah, you're an early riser as well," he says approvingly. "Would you care to see something interesting before breakfast?" You follow him outside to a small field separated from the others. Here, tall green plants grow in neat rows. "Hemp," George explains, seeing your curious look. "Excellent for rope and cloth. Every plantation should grow it." This is the hemp that Washington mentioned in his farm journals. While it contains almost no THC, nothing like modern marijuana, it's fascinating to see this crop that will later be so controversial growing openly on America's first president's farm. "The soil here is perfect for it," George continues, oblivious to your amusement. "I've been experimenting with different fertilization methods." George Washington, founding father, general, president, and enthusiastic hemp farmer. Back at the house, Martha has breakfast waiting. It's another hearty meal, needed for the physical work of 18th century life. As you eat, George outlines his plans for the day with military precision. Every hour is accounted for, every task prioritized. George keeps to a strict schedule, Martha explains. It's a habit from his military days, and it's a habit he'll maintain throughout his life. Even as president, Washington will be known for his punctuality and disciplined daily routine. After breakfast, you join George as he makes his rounds of the plantation. Today, you're on foot rather than horseback, which allows for a closer look at the daily operations of Mount Vernon. The property in 1759 is substantial, but nothing like the 8,000-acre, 5-farm operation it will eventually become. Currently, George manages about 2,000 acres with a workforce of around 50 enslaved people. This is one of the more uncomfortable aspects of Washington's life for modern visitors to consider. The man who led the fight for American liberty was himself an enslaver. As you walk the property with him, you see his interactions with the enslaved workers. He knows each by name and speaks to them directly about their tasks, not through an overseer. His manner is firm but not cruel. "Good work on the North Field, Neptune," he tells an older man working on a fence repair. "The new technique is holding well." The man nods respectfully. "Yes, sir. Should last through winter storms now." It's clear that George expects hard work and compliance, but there's also a sense that he values skill and initiative. He stops to observe a young man working with a draft horse, offers a suggestion on the harness adjustment, and nods with approval when the adjustment improves the horse's movement. Later, you ask him about his views on slavery. George pauses, looking uncomfortable. "It's the way things are done here," he says finally. "I inherited some of my first slaves from my father when I was merely 11 years old. The system was already in place." It's not a moral defense, you notice, and historical records show that Washington's views on slavery will evolve over time. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he'll eventually free his slaves in his will, though only after Martha's death. "They're valuable assets," George continues, more businesslike now. "Mount Vernon couldn't function without them." This pragmatic view is consistent with Washington's approach to most things. He's not a philosopher like Jefferson or a firebrand like Adams. He's practical, focused on what works. You continue your tour, stopping at the stables, the blacksmith's shop, the smokehouse, and various outbuildings. Everywhere, work is proceeding efficiently under George's watchful eye. Near midday, you encounter Martha in the kitchen garden inspecting the early spring plantings with the cook, a middle-aged enslaved woman named Lucy. "The mint is coming in nicely," Martha observes, "and the peas should be ready within the week." Lucy nods. "Yes, ma'am. Thought to serve them with the ham when the Fairfaxes visit." At the mention of the Fairfaxes, you glance quickly at George. His expression doesn't change, but you notice a slight stiffening of his shoulders. Is he thinking of Sally Fairfax, the woman to whom he wrote those passionate letters just months before marrying Martha? If Martha notices her husband's reaction, she gives no sign. She continues discussing meal plans with Lucy, competent and assured in her role as mistress of the household. George excuses himself to meet with his farm manager, and Martha invites you to join her in collecting herbs from the garden. As you help her snip sprigs of thyme and rosemary, you carefully bring up the subject of the Fairfaxes. "They're close friends," Martha says easily. "George especially is fond of George William Fairfax. They surveyed together when they were younger, and the Fairfaxes have been very supportive of George's career." There's no hint that she knows about her husband's feelings for Sally Fairfax. Either she truly doesn't know, or she's chosen not to acknowledge it. Either way, it's clear that the Fairfaxes are a regular part of their social circle. "They'll be dining with us tomorrow," she adds, along with a few other neighbours. "We try to maintain an active social life, even out here." Out here is relative. Mount Vernon is only about 15 miles from Alexandria, a significant town in colonial Virginia, but by 18th century transportation standards, it's enough of a journey to make casual visits difficult. "George enjoys company," Martha continues, "though you might not think it to look at him. He's reserved, but he thrives on good conversation." This matches what history records about Washington. Though not as brilliantly verbose as some of his contemporaries, he was known for being an excellent listener and for gathering diverse opinions before making decisions, a trait that would serve him well as a general and as president. As the day progresses, you observe more of the rhythms of life at Mount Vernon. George returns from his business in time for the midday meal, then retires to his study to handle correspondence. He writes dozens of letters each week, Martha tells you as she works on her needlepoint in the parlour, to friends, business associates, political connections. He's meticulous about maintaining relationships. Again, this is consistent with the historical record. Washington was known for his extensive network of correspondence and his careful attention to his mail, a practice he would continue as general and president. In the late afternoon, George suggests a walk down to the Potomac. The path winds through carefully maintained gardens before descending to the riverbank. The view from here is even more spectacular than from the house, the wide expanse of the river stretching before you, occasional boats passing by. "I never tire of this," George says quietly, gazing out at the water. "Even after all the travels of my military career, I find the Potomac the most beautiful river in the world." His love for Mount Vernon and this specific landscape is palpable. It helps explain why in later years he'll be so reluctant to leave it for public service and why he'll long to return during his years as general and president. As the sun begins to lower in the sky, casting golden light across the river, George points out various landmarks visible from your vantage point. He knows every bend in the river, every distant hill. This is truly his place in the world. On the walk back to the house, he tells you about his plans for expanding the gardens, creating a more formal layout inspired by designs he's seen in books about English estates. "I want to create something lasting," he explains, "something beautiful that will outlive me." It's a surprisingly reflective moment from a young man with presumably most of his life still ahead of him, but Washington has already faced death many times in his military career. During the French and Indian War, he had multiple horses shot out from under him and bullets pass through his clothing without wounding him. He's aware of his mortality in a way many young men are not. Back at the house, Martha has arranged for an especially nice dinner. Word has gotten around to the neighbouring farms that the Washingtons have a visitor and 2 local families have joined you for the evening meal. You observe George in this more public setting. He's gracious and attentive, though still somewhat reserved. He doesn't dominate the conversation, but listens carefully and speaks thoughtfully when he has something to contribute. Martha, on the other hand, shines as a hostess. She keeps the conversation flowing, makes sure everyone is comfortable, and manages the serving staff with subtle gestures that ensure everything proceeds smoothly. The conversation ranges from local matters to broader colonial issues. There's some discussion of British policies and taxes, but it's still theoretical at this point. The serious conflicts that will lead to revolution are still years away. After dinner, the gentlemen enjoy brandy while the ladies withdraw to the parlour. You find yourself with George and the other men discussing farming techniques and local politics. One of the neighbours mentions the Fairfaxes, commenting on some new furnishings they've imported from England. "Sally has excellent taste," the man says casually. "The new drawing room is quite impressive." George's expression doesn't change, but you notice his hand tighten slightly on his glass. "Indeed," he says neutrally, "the Fairfaxes maintain a fine home." It's impossible to know what he's thinking in this moment. Does he still harbour feelings for Sally, or has his affection for Martha superseded that earlier passion? Historical records can't tell us for certain. What we do know is that George and Martha Washington remained devoted partners for 40 years through war, presidency, and private life. The evening concludes pleasantly, with plans made for a fox hunt the following week. The neighbours depart with warm farewells and the household begins to settle for the night. Once again, in the parlour with just George and Martha, you notice how they've relaxed now that the guests are gone. George has removed his formal coat and stretched his long legs toward the fire. Martha has set aside her perfect hostess demeanour and picked up her needlework. A successful evening, I think, she comments, her needle flashing in the firelight. Indeed, George agrees, though Thornton went on rather too long about his new stallion. Martha chuckles. He always does, but his wife brought that excellent raspberry preserve, so we must tolerate his horse stories. There's an easy companionship between them, the comfortable back and forth of a couple who understand each other well. Whatever George might have felt for Sally Fairfax, he and Martha have clearly developed a genuine partnership. As the clock strikes 10, Martha sets aside her needlework. I should check on the children before retiring. George nods, stifling a yawn. I'll be up shortly. I have a few more letters to review. Martha pauses by his chair, resting her hand briefly on his shoulder. It's a small gesture, but an intimate one. George covers her hand with his own for a moment, looking up at her with a warm smile. It's these quiet moments, you think, that reveal the true nature of their relationship. Not grand passion, perhaps, but genuine affection and deep respect. You excuse yourself to your room, leaving them to their private evening routine. Your bed has again been warmed and the soft linen sheets welcome you as you slide between them. The sounds of the household settling for the night create a gentle backdrop. Distant voices, footsteps on the stairs, the occasional creak of the house itself. You find yourself thinking about what you've observed of George and Martha Washington over these 2 days. They're not the marble statues of history, but real people with complexities and contradictions. George, ambitious yet humble, reserved yet passionate about his interests. Martha, practical yet warm, deferential as was expected of women in her time, yet clearly a force to be reckoned with in her own domain. Together, they're building not just a home, but a partnership that will eventually help build a nation. Outside your window, the night is clear and filled with stars. No electric lights pollute the darkness of 18th century Virginia. The air is cool and sweet with the scent of spring blossoms. From somewhere in the distance comes the soft hooting of an owl. Your body sinks deeper into the feather mattress, your muscles relaxing after a day of walking the grounds with George. Your breathing slows naturally, matching the peaceful rhythm of the night. That's it, just like that, getting comfortable as you drift along on this journey through time, wondering what tomorrow will bring at Mount Vernon. Your eyelids feel heavy, but there's still more to discover about the private life of the man who will one day be called the father of his country. Morning light filters through the curtains of your guest room at Mount Vernon. Another day in 1759 with the Washingtons begins. As you dress and prepare for the day, you can already hear activity downstairs. The rhythmic sound of a broom on the wooden floors, the clatter of pots in the kitchen, muffled voices discussing the day's tasks. When you descend the stairs, you find George already at the breakfast table, studying a large map spread out beside his plate. He looks up as you enter, nodding in greeting. "I hope you slept well," he says, folding the map carefully. "I'm planning to show you something interesting this morning if you're amenable." Martha joins you moments later, fresh and composed despite the early hour. She pours coffee for all three of you from a silver pot, coffee being something of a luxury in colonial America, but one the Washingtons can well afford. "George tells me you're going to see the experimental fields today," she says, passing you a plate of warm biscuits. "Prepare yourself for an education. My husband is quite passionate about his agricultural experiments." George looks slightly embarrassed, but doesn't deny it. "Improving farming methods benefits everyone," he says. "It's not merely a hobby." After breakfast, George leads you out across the plantation to a section set apart from the main crop fields. Here, the same crop is planted in multiple small plots, each treated slightly differently. "Wheat," George explains, gesturing to the young green shoots. This plot received manure from cattle, that one from horses, the third from sheep. I'm determining which produces the highest yield. His expression is animated as he explains his methodology. This is clearly something he cares deeply about. It's a side of Washington most people don't learn about in history class. Not the general or the president, but the meticulous, innovative farmer. I keep detailed records of all my experiments, he continues, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Weather conditions, soil preparation, yield results, everything that might impact success or failure. You recall that Washington will later be known for his detailed record keeping as president. That habit clearly began here at Mount Vernon with his farming experiments. Many planters exhaust their soil with tobacco year after year, George explains as you walk between the experimental plots. Then they simply clear more forest when yields decline. It's short-sighted. He stops at another experimental area where an unfamiliar green crop is growing. Clover, he says, seeing your questioning look, imported from England. It restores nutrients to the soil if rotated properly with other crops. This forward-thinking approach to agriculture was unusual in colonial Virginia, where most planters focused on maximizing short-term profits from tobacco. Washington's willingness to experiment and invest in long-term sustainability reflects his character, patient, strategic, and always thinking about legacy. As you continue your tour, George points out other innovations he's testing, new ploughing techniques, irrigation methods, even experimental tools he's designed himself. Most of these ideas come from books, he admits. I have agricultural treatises sent from England, France, even the Netherlands. There's so much to learn. This is another revealing aspect of Washington's character. Despite his limited formal education, he was a lifelong learner who read voraciously and wasn't afraid to test new ideas. At midday, you return to the house for the main meal of the day. Martha has been busy in your absence, supervising the household staff and handling correspondence. She's also prepared for the arrival of the Fairfaxes, who are expected for dinner. They should arrive by 4, she tells George, as you sit down to eat. I've had the blue guest room prepared for them. The mention of the Fairfaxes brings a certain tension to the air. You can't help but wonder how George feels about seeing Sally Fairfax again, the woman to whom he wrote those passionate letters just months before marrying Martha. After the meal, George retires to his study to handle business matters, and Martha invites you to join her in the garden. The spring afternoon is pleasant, the sun warm, but not yet with the oppressive heat that Virginia summers bring. George spends too much time in that study, Martha comments, as you walk among the flower beds. He works himself too hard. There's concern in her voice, but also pride. She clearly admires her husband's work ethic, even while worrying about his tendency to overextend himself. He's always been this way, you ask. Martha nods. From all accounts, his brother Lawrence spoke of it often, how even as a young man, George pushed himself relentlessly. It served him well in his military career, but sometimes I fear for his health. This concern will prove prescient. Throughout his life, Washington will suffer several serious illnesses, some likely exacerbated by overwork and stress. He listens to you, though, you observe. Martha smiles, a mixture of amusement and affection. Sometimes, when he chooses to. George has very decided opinions, but he's not unreasonable. He considers advice even if he doesn't always take it. As you continue your walk through the gardens, Martha points out plants she's particularly proud of. Herbs for the kitchen, flowers for the table, medicinal plants for the household remedies she prepares herself. A plantation must be as self-sufficient as possible, she explains. I learned that from my first marriage. Mr. Custis believed in importing everything from England, down to the simplest medicines. It was wasteful and impractical. You're beginning to understand that Martha brings more than just wealth to her marriage with George. She brings practical knowledge, experience in running a large plantation, and a sensible approach that complements his more experimental nature. Later in the afternoon, the Fairfaxes arrive in a handsome carriage. George Washington greets his neighbours with genuine warmth, particularly George William Fairfax, who has been his friend and mentor for many years. And then there's Sally Fairfax, beautiful, cultured, and very much the elegant lady of colonial high society. She embraces Martha with apparent affection, the two women exchanging pleasantries about family and mutual acquaintances. You watch carefully as George greets Sally. There's respect in his manner, certainly, and the polished courtesy he shows to all ladies of his acquaintance. But is there something more? A lingering glance, perhaps, or a slight softening of his normally reserved expression? It's impossible to say for certain. If George still harbours feelings for Sally Fairfax, he conceals them well behind his usual composed demeanour. What's clear is that both couples maintain a cordial, even friendly relationship, despite whatever private emotions might exist beneath the surface. The evening passes pleasantly with dinner and conversation in the parlour afterward. George William Fairfax and George Washington discuss local politics and business matters, while Martha and Sally exchange news about mutual friends and household affairs. You notice that George is particularly animated when talking with his friend. The two men clearly share interests and perspectives, making their friendship natural and easy. If George feels any awkwardness about his former feelings for his friend's wife, it doesn't interfere with the genuine camaraderie between the men. As the evening progresses, the conversation turns to music. Sally Fairfax is known for her skill at the harpsichord, and she agrees to play for the company. Her performance is accomplished and graceful, drawing appreciative applause. "Now you must play for us, Martha," Sally urges after finishing her piece. Martha demurs. "I'm afraid my skills are modest compared to yours, my dear." But George adds his encouragement. "Please, Martha, the piece you were practicing yesterday was quite charming." With gentle persuasion from both her husband and her guests, Martha finally takes her place at the instrument. Her playing is indeed less polished than Sally's, but there's a warmth to her interpretation that's engaging. George watches his wife with unmistakable pride, and you catch a moment when his eyes meet Martha's across the room, a private smile passing between them. Whatever George might have felt for Sally Fairfax, it's clear that he values and appreciates Martha. Their relationship may have begun as a practical arrangement, but genuine affection has grown between them. The evening concludes with plans made for a joint excursion to Alexandria the following week. The Fairfaxes depart with warm farewells, promising to send over some new music scores for Martha. After they've gone, there's a moment of quiet in the parlour. George stands by the window, looking out into the darkness, his expression thoughtful. Martha watches him for a moment, then approaches to stand beside him. "A pleasant evening," she comments, her voice soft. George nods, turning to look at her. "Indeed. William has interesting ideas about the new road project." "And Sally's playing was lovely as always," Martha adds. There's no jealousy in her tone, no hint that she suspects her husband once had feelings for her friend. Either she truly doesn't know, or she's chosen to set it aside, focusing instead on the life they're building together. George places his hand over Martha's where it rests on the windowsill. "But I prefer your playing," he says quietly. "It has heart." It's a small moment, but a revealing one. Washington isn't known for flowery compliments or romantic gestures. This simple statement, delivered quietly and sincerely, carries weight. Martha's smile is warm as she squeezes his hand in return. "You're kind to say so." The next morning brings another aspect of George Washington's private life into focus, his relationship with the enslaved people who work at Mount Vernon. You accompany George on his morning rounds, visiting various work sites around the plantation. At each stop, he speaks directly with the enslaved workers, asking specific questions about their tasks and progress. His manner is neither cruel nor particularly compassionate by modern standards. He's businesslike, expecting efficient work and compliance with his instructions, but he also recognizes skills and intelligence, sometimes asking for opinions on how best to approach a particular problem. At the blacksmith shop, you watch as George discusses the repair of a broken plough with the smith, a powerfully built man named Neptune. Neptune suggests a modification to strengthen the weak point that caused the break. "Show me," George says, and listens attentively as Neptune explains his idea. "That seems sound," George agrees after considering the proposal. "Make the change and we'll test it in the north field." Neptune nods, clearly pleased that his expertise has been recognized. Later, you ask George about his approach to managing the enslaved workforce. "They're valuable assets," he responds, echoing his comment from the previous day. "Skilled workers like Neptune are irreplaceable. It makes good business sense to listen to their expertise. It's a pragmatic view, not a moral one." At this point in his life, Washington doesn't question the institution of slavery itself, though historical records show his thinking will evolve over time. What's notable is his recognition of the humanity and intelligence of the people he enslaves, even if he doesn't yet recognize the fundamental injustice of their enslavement. It's a contradiction that Washington will wrestle with throughout his life. The day continues with a visit to the grist mill, where corn and wheat are ground into meal and flour. George explains his plans to modernize the operation, potentially adding a distillery in the future. Wheat can be processed into flour or whiskey, he explains. Both are valuable commodities for trade. He's always thinking ahead, looking for ways to diversify and improve Mount Vernon's operations. This forward-thinking approach will serve him well in later years, both as a general planning military campaigns and as a president establishing precedents for a new nation. In the afternoon, you witness another side of Washington's character when a message arrives from a neighboring plantation. A fire has broken out in their tobacco barn and they're asking for assistance. George immediately organizes a group of workers to go help, selecting men with experience fighting fires. He himself prepares to ride over and assist. "You'll stay and look after things here?" he asks Martha, who has already begun gathering medical supplies that might be needed for burns. "Of course," she responds without hesitation. "Take William with you. He's good with burns, and the new linen sheets can be torn for bandages if needed." The efficient way they respond to this emergency reveals much about both Washingtons. There's no panic, no wasted motion, just practical action and clear communication. It's easy to imagine George bringing this same calm efficiency to military crises during the Revolution, and Martha providing the same steady support in her visits to army camps. By evening, George returns, tired and smoke-stained but satisfied that the fire has been contained with minimal injury to workers and limited damage to buildings. Martha has kept dinner waiting, and she personally helps him wash away the worst of the soot before sitting down to eat. Her concern for his well-being is evident, though she doesn't fuss over him in a way that might embarrass him. "Or Anderson burned his hands rather badly," George reports as he eats. "But William treated him well. The main barn was saved, though they lost most of this year's tobacco crop." "A difficult loss," Martha acknowledges. "Will they need assistance with supplies?" George nods. "I've offered what we can spare." Johnson was grateful. This quiet generosity is characteristic of the Washingtons. Historical records show that throughout their lives they frequently assisted neighbors and community members in need with little fanfare or expectation of recognition. After dinner, George is clearly exhausted from the day's exertions. Martha gently suggests he retire early, and for once, he doesn't argue about leaving work unfinished. A wise suggestion, he agrees, stifling a yawn. The letters can wait until morning. You find yourself alone with Martha in the parlour, the house quiet except for the occasional crackle from the fireplace. He works too hard, Martha says softly, looking towards the stairs where George has disappeared. Always has, always will. It's his nature. You balance him well, you observe. Martha smiles. We suit each other, I think. He has grand visions. I manage the practical details. He drives forward. I remind him to rest occasionally. She picks up her needlework. It's a good partnership. And that, you think, is the essence of George and Martha Washington's relationship, not the romantic ideal of passionate love that modern people might expect, but a true partnership based on mutual respect, complementary strengths, and genuine affection. You excuse yourself to bed not long after, leaving Martha to her sewing. Your room is comfortable and familiar now, the strange sounds of an 18th century house no longer keeping you awake. As you settle into the featherbed, you reflect on what you've learned about George Washington's private life. He's ambitious but principled, driven but capable of kindness, serious but with moments of warmth that surprise those around him,
providing the stable home base from which he can pursue his broader goals.
Together, they're building something at Mount Vernon, not just a profitable plantation, but a life that reflects their shared values and aspirations. Neither of them knows that in less than 20 years, they'll be thrust onto the world stage, with George leading a revolution and Martha supporting him through 8 years of war. For now, they're simply George and Martha Washington, Virginia planters, host and hostess, husband and wife, working together day by day to create the life they envision. Outside your window, an owl calls softly in the darkness. The house creaks and settles around you. Your body feels heavy against the mattress, muscles relaxing after the day's activities. Nice and easy now. That's it. Your breathing slows naturally, matching the peaceful rhythm of this place from long ago. The worries of your modern life seem distant and unimportant as you sink deeper into this moment in history. Your mind drifts pleasantly, wondering what new aspects of the Washingtons' private life you might discover tomorrow as the gentle night sounds of 18th century Virginia surround you. The next morning at Mount Vernon brings the sounds of gentle rain tapping against your window. The rhythm is soothing, almost hypnotic. Through the rain-streaked glass, you can see that the Potomac River has turned a steely grey, matching the clouds overhead. When you make your way downstairs, you find the house quieter than usual. No George Washington striding purposefully through rooms or issuing instructions to workers. Instead, Martha sits alone in the small parlour, her needlework in her lap, gazing out at the rain. "Good morning," she says with a warm smile. "I'm afraid the weather has altered our plans for today." George is in his study catching up on correspondence. He sees rainy days as a gift, time to address the paperwork he usually postpones in favour of outdoor work. She invites you to join her for coffee, and as you settle into a chair nearby, you realise this is a perfect opportunity to learn more about the private George Washington from the person who knows him best. "He's an interesting man, your husband," you say casually. Martha's smile turns thoughtful. Yes, though not in the ways most people might think. Everyone sees the public man, tall, impressive, serious. Few know the private George. And what is he like, the private George, you ask? Martha considers the question, her fingers automatically continuing their skilled work with needle and thread. He's more complex than people realize. He appears so controlled, so measured in public, and he is those things. He values self-discipline greatly, but there's passion beneath that control. She glances toward the door of the study where her husband works in solitude. He feels things deeply. Disappointments cut him to the quick. Successes bring him genuine joy. But he believes a gentleman should master his emotions, not be mastered by them. This aligns with what historians have recorded about Washington. Throughout his life, he worked to develop what he called his character, a public persona of dignity, restraint, and principled action. But private letters and accounts from those close to him reveal a man who experienced strong emotions, even if he rarely displayed them openly. He has a temper, Martha continues, her voice lower now, though he's learned to govern it well. Sometimes when he's truly provoked, you can see it in his eyes, a flash of something formidable, but he rarely loses control of it now. You recall historical accounts of Washington's legendary temper. Though generally controlled, there were moments during the Revolutionary War when it broke through, moments of battlefield rage that startled those who knew only his usual reserve. What makes him happiest, you ask? Martha's expression softens. Being here, working this land, seeing something he's planted grow and thrive. He loves Mount Vernon more than any place on earth. It's a simple answer, but a revealing one. Throughout his life, Washington will repeatedly express his longing to return to Mount Vernon when duty calls him away. Even as president, he'll count the days until he can retire to his beloved home. And what about his ambitions, you ask carefully? Does he desire public office, political power? Martha sets down her needlework, considering her response. George desires respect, she says finally, recognition of his abilities. He believes he has contributions to make beyond this plantation, but he doesn't seek power for its own sake. She picks up her work again. He's turned down payment for public service before. During the French and Indian War, he served without salary, only reimbursement for expenses. He believes public service should be motivated by duty, not personal gain. This stance will become one of Washington's defining characteristics. Later, as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, he will again refuse a salary, and as President, he will initially try to decline payment before accepting a salary to set a precedent for future presidents who might not have his personal wealth. Your conversation is interrupted by the arrival of one of the house slaves, a young woman named Caroline, bringing fresh coffee and warm bread. "Thank you, Caroline," Martha says. "Is Jackie still at his lessons?" "Yes, ma'am. Miss Patsy, too. The tutor has them reading together this morning." After Caroline leaves, you ask Martha about her approach to raising the children. "They need both nurturing and discipline," she says, "especially now, having lost their father so young. George is still finding his way as their stepfather. He's strict but fair with them." Before you can ask more, the door to the study opens and George Washington himself appears. Even on this informal, rainy day at home, he's fully dressed in proper attire, his posture impeccable. You've noticed he never allows himself to appear disheveled or unprepared, even in private. "Good morning," he says, nodding to you before leaning down to briefly touch Martha's shoulder, a small gesture of affection. The rain shows no sign of letting up. "You've finished your letters?" Martha asks. "Most of them. There's still the matter of the land dispute with Johnson to address." He sighs, clearly not looking forward to that particular correspondence. "That can wait until after breakfast, surely," Martha suggests, rising from her chair. "You've been working since dawn." George hesitates, then nods. A reasonable suggestion. Over breakfast, you observe the easy rhythm George and Martha have developed in their few months of marriage. She anticipates his needs, passing him his favourite preserves before he asks. He listens attentively when she mentions household matters, offering thoughtful responses rather than dismissive acknowledgements. After the meal, George surprises you by inviting you to join him in his study. "If you've no objection to watching me write tedious letters," he adds with a rare flash of dry humour. Washington's study is a reflection of the man himself, orderly, practical, and focused on his interests. Bookshelves hold volumes on agriculture, military tactics, history, and natural philosophy. Maps hang on the walls, some commercially printed, others drawn by Washington himself during his early career as a surveyor. His desk is immaculate, papers arranged in neat stacks, writing implements aligned with precision. This methodical organization will be characteristic of Washington throughout his life. His military headquarters during the Revolution will display the same ordered efficiency. George settles behind his desk and gestures for you to take a seat nearby. As he returns to his correspondence, you have an opportunity to observe him at work. He writes with deliberate care, occasionally consulting other documents or pausing to consider his wording. There's nothing hasty or impulsive about his approach. Each letter, you realize, is being crafted with the same attention he gives to planting fields or designing building improvements. After completing one letter, he looks up, perhaps sensing your curiosity. "Communication is an essential art," he says, gesturing to the paper before him, "especially when managing affairs from a distance. You seem to have mastered it," you observe. George shakes his head modestly. "I lack the eloquence of many of my contemporaries, but I strive for clarity and honesty in my correspondence." This assessment aligns with what history records. Washington was never known for the soaring rhetoric of a Jefferson or the sharp wit of a Franklin. His strength was in straightforward communication and, perhaps more importantly, in listening carefully to diverse perspectives before reaching decisions. As the morning progresses, you notice another characteristic that will serve Washington well in his future roles: his remarkable stamina and focus. He works steadily for hours, maintaining the same level of attention and care with his 20th letter as with his first. Around midday, there's a knock at the study door. Martha enters with a tray of light refreshments: bread, cheese, and cider. "You need to pause," she says firmly to her husband. "You've been at this since dawn." George looks like he might protest, but then notices the stiffness in his shoulders as he straightens. "Perhaps you're right," he concedes. This small exchange reveals much about their relationship. Martha respects George's work enough not to interrupt it unnecessarily, but she's also comfortable asserting herself when his well-being is concerned. And George, despite his famous self-discipline and drive, is willing to yield to her judgment in these matters. As you share the simple meal, the conversation turns to George's early life and formative experiences. "I was 11 when my father died," he tells you, his expression thoughtful. "It altered the course of my life significantly. My older half-brothers had been educated in England, and I expected the same opportunity. Instead, I remained here, studying with local tutors." There's no self-pity in his tone, just a factual recounting, but you sense this early disappointment shaped him, perhaps contributing to his lifelong habit of self-improvement through reading and observation. "Lawrence became my guide," he continues, referring to his beloved half-brother who would also die young. "He introduced me to the Fairfaxes, which opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to me." The connection to the wealthy and influential Fairfax family was indeed crucial to young Washington's advancement. Through them, he gained not only social connections but also his first opportunity as a surveyor, the starting point of his professional life. You've accomplished much despite the lack of formal education, you observe. George nods, acknowledging the comment without false modesty. I've always believed that a man's character and actions matter more than his credentials. Education is valuable, certainly, but it's not the only path to knowledge or capability. This practical, merit-based view will inform Washington's approach to leadership throughout his life. During the Revolution, he'll promote officers based on demonstrated ability rather than social standing, sometimes to the dismay of more traditionally minded contemporaries. As the rain continues to fall outside, your conversation with the Washingtons drifts to lighter topics. You learn that George has a surprising fondness for dancing, often riding significant distances to attend balls. Martha teases him gently about his enthusiasm for the latest dance steps, causing a faint blush to colour his normally composed features. Mrs. Washington exaggerates, he protests, but there's a twinkle in his eye that suggests he knows she's right. You also discover George's love of theatre, another interest that might seem at odds with his serious public image. When in Williamsburg or Philadelphia, he frequently attends performances, particularly enjoying comedies. Life contains enough tragedy without seeking it on stage, he comments. By mid-afternoon, the rain begins to ease, thin sunlight breaking through the clouds. George rises from his desk, clearly eager to escape the confines of the house and check on how the rainfall has affected his fields and ongoing projects. "Would you care to join me?" he asks. "The paths will be muddy, but the air is fresh after rain." You accept and soon find yourself walking beside Washington as he makes a circuit of the nearby fields and gardens. His keen eye misses nothing: a fence post tilting after the rain, a section of garden where water has pooled too deeply, a new shoot emerging from recently planted seeds. "The rain is a blessing overall," he comments, surveying the glistening landscape, though it will delay the ploughing of the north field. As you walk, several enslaved workers approach Washington with questions or reports. You notice again his direct manner with them. Not cruel, but not particularly warm either. He knows each by name and seems to have a clear understanding of their individual skills and responsibilities. At one point, an older man named Marcus approaches with a suggestion about drainage for a particular field that's prone to flooding. Washington listens attentively, asks several clarifying questions, then nods in agreement. "A sound approach," he tells Marcus. "See to it tomorrow if the ground is dry enough?" Marcus nods, a flash of satisfaction crossing his face at having his expertise recognized. Later, you ask Washington about this interaction, curious about his relationship with the people he enslaves. "Marcus has worked that field for 20 years, George explains. "He knows its peculiarities better than I ever could. It would be foolish to ignore his knowledge simply because of his status." It's a pragmatic view, not a moral one. At this point in his life, Washington accepts slavery as the established system, even while recognizing the humanity and value of enslaved individuals. His views will evolve over time, ultimately leading to his decision to free as slaves in his will, though only after both his and Martha's deaths. As evening approaches, you return to the house with George, both of you muddy from the wet paths. Martha meets you at the door, somehow having anticipated your return despite the unpredictable weather. "Clean boots by the fire," she directs, gesturing to where 2 pairs of dry footwear are already warming. It's a small detail, but it speaks to her thoughtfulness and efficiency as the mistress of Mount Vernon. After changing into dry clothes, you join the Washingtons for dinner. The children, Jackie and Patsy, join you as well, having completed their lessons for the day. You notice George making an effort to engage with them, asking about their studies and listening to their responses with genuine interest. It's clearly still an evolving relationship. There's a formality between stepfather and children that hasn't yet softened into easy familiarity, but there's goodwill on all sides, and Martha watches the interactions with obvious pleasure. After dinner, the family gathers in the parlour. To your surprise, George produces a book and offers to read aloud, a popular novel of the time. His reading voice is pleasant, deeper than his speaking voice, with clear enunciation and appropriate expression. The children listen attentively, and Martha works on her needlepoint, a contented smile on her face. This peaceful domestic scene stands in stark contrast to the public image of Washington as the stern general or dignified president. Here, in the privacy of his home, he's simply a man enjoying an evening with his family. Later, when the children have been sent to bed, George, Martha and you linger in the parlour, conversing by firelight. The rain has returned, drumming softly on the roof and windows, creating a cosy atmosphere inside. Will you stay at Mount Vernon always, you ask, knowing the history that will eventually take them away from this place they clearly love? George and Martha exchange a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. "This is our home," George says finally, "where we hope to live out our days in peace." Though George's talents may call him to public service again, Martha adds, her tone suggesting this is a topic they've discussed before, if duty requires it. "Let us hope it doesn't come to that," George responds, reaching over to briefly cover her hand with his own. Neither of them can know what the future holds, that in 16 years George will be called to lead an army against the British, beginning an 8-year separation during the Revolutionary War, or that after that he'll be unanimously elected as the first President of the United States, taking Martha away from her beloved Mount Vernon again for 8 more years. For now, they're simply a couple building a life together, hoping for a peaceful future on the plantation they both love. As the evening grows late, you find yourself fighting off yawns, the day's activities and the hypnotic sound of the rain having a soporific effect. Martha notices immediately. "You must be tired. We rise early at Mount Vernon." "Indeed we do," George agrees, standing to signal the end of the evening. "Rest well. Perhaps tomorrow the weather will allow us to show you more of the estate." You bid the Washingtons good night and make your way to your room, where someone has already turned down the bed and placed a warming pan between the sheets to chase away the dampness of the rainy day. As you settle into the comfortable bed, you reflect on what you've learned about George Washington's private life. He's a complex man, driven yet measured, ambitious yet content at Mount Vernon, reserved yet capable of warmth with those closest to him. And Martha complements him perfectly, practical where he's visionary, social where he's reserved, grounding his ambition while supporting his potential. Together, they create something greater than either could alone. It's a true partnership and one that will help shape a nation, though neither of them knows that yet. Outside your window, the rain continues its gentle rhythm, a natural lullaby. Your body feels heavy against the mattress, muscles relaxing as you sink deeper into the featherbed. Your breathing slows naturally, matching the peaceful cadence of the rain. Nice and easy, just like that. Your eyelids grow heavier, but your mind still drifts with curiosity about what more you might learn of the private George Washington tomorrow. Morning light streams through your window at Mount Vernon, the rain clouds of yesterday having given way to clear blue skies. The air smells fresh and clean, that special scent that comes after a good rain, earthy and green with hints of flowering plants coming back to life. You dress quickly, eager for your final day exploring George Washington's private life. When you make your way downstairs, you find the house already humming with activity. Martha is directing the household staff, planning menus and organizing the day's tasks with quiet efficiency. George is in the stables, she tells you with a knowing smile. He's been eager to show you his horses since you arrived. You find Washington in the stable yard, deep in conversation with the stable master. He brightens when he sees you, gesturing toward a magnificent white horse in the nearest stall. "This is Nelson," he says with unmistakable pride. "Finest war horse I've ever known." The horse is indeed impressive. Tall and powerful, with an intelligent eye and proud bearing that seems to match his master's. Nelson approaches the stall door and Washington strokes his nose with genuine affection. "He carried me through the worst of the fighting at Yorktown," George continues. Then, catching himself, he laughs. "But that's getting ahead of ourselves, isn't it? Yorktown is still years in the future." This slip reveals something interesting about Washington. He's been speaking to you as if you're a visitor to Mount Vernon in 1759, but occasionally his guard drops and he seems aware of your true nature as a traveller from the future, exploring his private life with the benefit of historical hindsight. "I've always had a special connection with horses," George tells you, leading Nelson out of his stall and into the yard. "Some men never develop the proper feel for it. They see horses as tools, nothing more. But these animals," he pats Nelson's neck, "they have spirit, intelligence. They're partners, not possessions." This genuine affection for animals is another aspect of Washington's character that doesn't make it into most history books. Throughout his life, he'll be known for his excellent horsemanship and his attachment to his mounts. During the Revolution, he'll go to great lengths to ensure his horses receive proper care, even during the most difficult campaigns. "Would you care to ride out with me this morning?" George asks. "There's something I'd like to show you before you leave us." Soon you're mounted on a gentle bay mare, following Washington as he guides Nelson along a path that winds through woods and fields away from the main plantation. George rides with the easy grace of a man who spent most of his life on horseback. He sits straight but not stiff, moving in perfect harmony with his horse's gait. After about 20 minutes, you emerge from a wooded area onto a small rise overlooking a secluded meadow. George reins Nelson to a stop and gestures toward the view. "I come here sometimes," he says quietly, "when I need to think clearly, away from the demands of the plantation, the expectations of others." The spot is indeed beautiful, peaceful and private, with the distant Potomac visible through a break in the trees. You can easily imagine Washington retreating here to contemplate difficult decisions or simply to find a moment's peace in his busy life. "A man in public life needs such places," George continues, his expression thoughtful, "somewhere to remember who he truly is beneath the role he plays for others." This is a remarkably self-aware statement, revealing Washington's understanding of the distinction between his public persona and his private self. Throughout his life, he'll maintain this distinction, carefully crafting his public image while guarding his innermost thoughts and feelings. "Do you think much about your future beyond Mount Vernon?" you ask carefully. George considers the question, his gaze still on the distant river. "I think about my responsibilities," he says finally, "to this land, to my family, to Virginia. Beyond that," he shrugs slightly, "Providence will chart the course." His answer reveals both ambition and humility. He clearly sees himself as someone with duties beyond his private concerns, but he's not actively plotting a path to greater power or prominence. This balance of personal ambition and public service will define Washington's approach throughout his life. After a few minutes of peaceful contemplation, George turns Nelson back toward Mount Vernon. "I've promised to inspect the new fencing today," he explains, "and Martha will have breakfast waiting." The ride back is pleasant, with George pointing out various features of his land, a particularly productive field, a stand of timber he's preserving for future use, a stream he's planning to dam to create a decorative pond. His deep connection to this place is evident in every observation. Mount Vernon isn't just a profitable investment for Washington, it's his passion, his creative outlet, his refuge. When you return to the stables, George personally sees to Nelson's care before entrusting him to the stable master. It's another small detail that reveals his character. Despite his status, he doesn't consider himself above tasks like rubbing down his own horse. Back at the house, breakfast is indeed waiting, along with Martha and the children. The meal is convivial, with Jackie excitedly telling George about a fox he spotted near the garden that morning. "Perhaps we should organize a hunt before the weather turns too warm," George suggests, causing the boy's face to light up with excitement. You notice the gradual warming of George's relationship with his stepchildren. He's still not demonstrative in the way a modern parent might be, but there's genuine interest and growing affection in his interactions with them. After breakfast, George invites you to join him for one final tour of the plantation, this time to see the operations that make Mount Vernon a working farm rather than just a gentleman's estate. Your first stop is the grist mill, where wheat and corn are ground into flour and meal. The mill is impressively engineered, with George explaining the mechanisms with obvious technical understanding. "I plan to expand this operation," he tells you, raising his voice slightly over the noise of the grinding stones. "Maybe add a distillery one day." Again, his knowledge of the future slips in. The distillery won't become reality until after his presidency, but it will eventually be one of the largest and most profitable in America, producing nearly 11,000 gallons of whiskey annually. Next, you visit the smokehouse, where meat is preserved through a careful process of salting and smoking. Martha joins you here, inspecting the hanging hams with a critical eye. "We lost 2 to spoilage last winter," she explains. "I've adjusted the salt mixture this year." The tour continues through various outbuildings and work areas, the blacksmith's forge, the carpenter's shop, the spinning house where cloth is produced. At each stop, George introduces you to the enslaved workers who keep these operations running, always acknowledging their specific skills and contributions. "William here is the finest blacksmith in Virginia," he says of a muscular man working at the forge. "He can fashion any tool I design, no matter how unusual." William nods at the compliment, his expression carefully neutral. The power dynamic is inescapable. No matter how much Washington values William's skills, the man is still property under Virginia law, not free to use his talents as he chooses. This contradiction is perhaps the most difficult aspect of Washington's private life to reconcile with his public legacy. The man who led the fight for American liberty was himself a slave owner for most of his life, only arranging for manumission after his death. Yet even in 1759, there are hints of the evolution in Washington's thinking that will eventually lead to that decision. He treats the enslaved people at Mount Vernon with a degree of respect unusual for the time, recognizing their humanity and skills even while maintaining the fundamental injustice of their enslavement. By midday, your tour of Mount Vernon's operations is complete, and you return to the house for the main meal of the day. As you eat, Martha mentions plans for expanding the garden, and George immediately pulls out a small notebook to sketch a design. "Perhaps a circular pattern here," he suggests, drawing quickly but precisely, with the herbs arranged by type rather than alphabetically. It's a small moment, but it reveals the way the Washingtons work together, his vision combining with her practical knowledge, each respecting the other's domain while offering suggestions. After the meal, George excuses himself to handle some business correspondence, and Martha invites you to join her on the small porch overlooking the Potomac. "I've enjoyed having you with us," she says as you both settle into comfortable chairs. George doesn't often speak so openly with visitors. You thank her for her hospitality, wondering how to ask the questions that still linger in your mind about their relationship. Martha seems to sense your curiosity. "You wonder about us, don't you? How we came to be, what holds us together?" When you nod, she continues, her gaze on the distant river. "It wasn't a love match, not at first. We were both practical people, making a practical arrangement. I needed a partner to help manage my estates and raise my children. He needed a wife suitable to his ambitions." She smiles softly, but affection grew. Respect became admiration. Companionship deepened into something more. Martha looks toward the study where George works. He's not a man who shows his feelings easily, but they run deep. When Patsy had her first seizure, he stayed by her bedside all night, holding her hand. When Jackie struggled with his lessons, George spent hours helping him, never losing patience. These glimpses into their family life reveal a side of Washington rarely seen in historical accounts. The loving stepfather, the devoted husband, the private man behind the public figure. And you ask, are you happy with the life you've built together? Martha considers the question, her expression thoughtful. Happy? Yes, though it's not the giddy happiness of romance novels. It's deeper than that. Contentment, security, purpose, and yes, love, the kind that grows through shared experiences and mutual respect. She leans forward slightly, her voice lowering confidentially. "Let me tell you something about George that few people know." He laughs, not often, not loudly, but when something truly amuses him, his whole face transforms. It's like watching the sun break through clouds. This image of Washington laughing openly is indeed at odds with the stern-faced figure in portraits and on the dollar bill, but historical accounts from those closest to him confirm Martha's description. In private, with those he trusted, Washington could be warm and even humorous. Your conversation with Martha is interrupted by George himself, returning from his study with a satisfied expression. "The business with Johnson is settled," he announces. "A fair compromise, I believe." "Excellent," Martha responds. "Now perhaps you can join us in enjoying this beautiful afternoon instead of hiding away with your letters." George smiles at her gentle teasing and takes a seat, stretching his long legs before him with a sigh of contentment. For a while, the three of you simply sit in comfortable silence, watching the play of light on the river and the distant sails of ships heading to and from Alexandria. It's a peaceful moment that captures the essence of the Washingtons' private life at Mount Vernon, this idyllic interlude before history calls them to larger stages and greater responsibilities. As the afternoon wanes, George suggests a final walk through the gardens, now refreshed by yesterday's rain. The paths are still slightly muddy, but the flowers are vibrant, their scents filling the warm air. "We've been discussing my plans to expand this section," George tells you, indicating an area near the house. "Martha favours more herbs and vegetables, practical as always. I'm arguing for ornamental plants as well. A balance of beauty and utility seems wise, you suggest." George laughs, that rare, transformative laugh Martha described. "A diplomatic answer. Perhaps you should consider a career in politics." The irony, of course, is that it's Washington himself who will need those diplomatic skills in his future roles. As both general and president, he'll frequently find himself mediating between competing factions and strong personalities. As your walk concludes, you find yourselves back at the house just as the sun begins its descent toward the horizon. The golden evening light bathes Mount Vernon in a warm glow, highlighting the beauty of this place that means so much to both Washingtons. Our last evening together, Martha observes, I've asked the cook to prepare something special. Dinner that night is indeed a feast, featuring dishes that showcase both Martha's household management and the abundance of Mount Vernon's farms and gardens. The conversation flows easily, touching on topics from local gossip to philosophical questions about governance and liberty. You notice how George and Martha complement each other in these discussions. He tends toward broader principles and theoretical concerns. She brings the conversation back to practical impacts and human considerations. Together, they create a balanced perspective that neither would achieve alone. After dinner, the family gathers in the parlour, as has become your evening routine. Jackie proudly shows you a map he's drawn under George's tutelage, not perfectly accurate, but showing impressive skill for a 6-year-old. He has a natural talent for spatial relations, George comments, his tone matter-of-fact, but with unmistakable pride. Patsy, not to be outdone, performs a simple tune on the harpsichord that she's been practicing with Martha's help. The adults applaud appreciatively, and the little girl beams at their approval. These domestic scenes reveal yet another facet of Washington's private life. His growing comfort in the role of stepfather and his genuine interest in the children's development. As the evening progresses, George brings out a bottle of fine Madeira wine to share with you, a special gesture as imported wines were expensive luxuries in colonial America. To new friendships, he toasts, raising his glass, and to the memories we create at Mount Vernon. Martha adds her own toast. To peaceful days and quiet evenings. May we enjoy many more of them. There's a poignancy to her words, though she doesn't know it yet. In the years to come, the Revolutionary War will separate them for long periods, and Washington's presidency will take them away from their beloved Mount Vernon for 8 crucial years. But for now, in this peaceful evening in 1759, they're simply George and Martha Washington, host and hostess, enjoying a quiet night at home with family and a guest. As the evening grows late, the children are sent to bed with affectionate goodnights from both parents. The 3 adults linger in the parlour, the conversation turning reflective as often happens in the late hours. What do you hope for, looking ahead, you ask them both. George and Martha exchange a glance, one of those moments of wordless communication that long-married couples develop. I hope to see Mount Vernon flourish, George says finally, to leave it better than I found it, to create something that will outlast me. I hope for health and happiness for the children, Martha adds, to see them grow into good people, well prepared for their places in the world. These simple aspirations reveal much about both Washington's values. Neither mentions wealth or power or fame. Their focus is on stewardship of land, of family, of responsibility. Of course, history has much more in store for them than these modest hopes. In less than 20 years, George Washington will lead a revolution, create a new nation, and establish precedents that will shape American democracy for centuries to come. And Martha will be beside him through it all, supporting his public role while maintaining their private connection. But tonight, they're simply a couple sharing a quiet evening at home, unaware of the extraordinary journey that awaits them. As the clock strikes 10, Martha rises, signalling the end of the evening. You have an early start tomorrow, she reminds you. The carriage is arranged for first light. You bid the Washingtons good night, thanking them for their hospitality and the rare glimpse into their private lives. George's handshake is firm, his gaze direct. Martha's embrace is warm and genuine. "Safe travels," George says, "and know that you are always welcome at Mount Vernon." In your room for the final night, you find everything prepared for your departure. Clothes laid out, bags ready to pack in the morning. The attention to detail that characterizes both Washingtons extends even to these practical matters. As you prepare for sleep, you reflect on what you've learned about George Washington's private life. He's a man of contradictions, ambitious yet content at Mount Vernon, reserved yet capable of deep feeling, practical yet visionary. And Martha is his perfect complement, grounding his lofty ideals with practical wisdom, warming his reserved nature with her sociability, sharing his values while balancing his perspectives. Together, they create something greater than either could alone, a partnership that will help shape a nation, though neither of them knows that yet. You settle into the featherbed for the last time, feeling the familiar softness envelop you. Through the window, stars sparkle in the clear night sky, so much brighter than in your light-polluted modern world. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls softly. The quiet sounds of an 18th century night surround you, the occasional creak of the house settling, the distant neigh of a horse in the stables, the soft whisper of wind through trees outside your window. Your body feels heavy against the mattress, muscles relaxing as the activities of the day fade into pleasant weariness. Your breathing slows naturally, finding a peaceful rhythm, nice and easy, just like that. The worries and stresses of your modern life seem far away now, replaced by the simple peace of this moment in time. You can feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation, each breath taking you further into tranquility. Your eyelids grow heavier with each slow blink. The room around you softens, the details blurring gently as your focus turns inward. That's it. Just letting go now. As sleep approaches, you carry with you images from your time at Mount Vernon. George Washington riding tall on Nelson, his face animated as he explains a farming experiment. Martha's gentle smile as she watches her children, the two of them together on the porch, silhouetted against the setting sun over the Potomac. These glimpses into their private life reveal the humanity behind the historical figures, the real people who lived and loved and built something lasting together at Mount Vernon. Your breathing deepens, your thoughts becoming more distant and dreamlike. The line between your experience at Mount Vernon and the approaching realm of dreams begins to blur pleasantly. Perhaps tonight you'll dream of riding beside George Washington across his beloved fields, or sitting with Martha in the garden as she shares household wisdom accumulated through years of managing large plantations. Or perhaps you'll simply drift into peaceful darkness, carried by the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the soft sounds of the night at Mount Vernon. Either way, sleep beckons now, deep and restful. Your journey into George Washington's private life complete, you can surrender to slumber, knowing that when you wake, you'll carry with you a richer understanding of the man behind the monument, the private person behind the public figure. Your eyelids flutter once more, then close completely. Your breathing settles into the steady pattern of sleep, and as consciousness fades, your last thought is of George and Martha Washington, standing together on the porch of Mount Vernon, watching the sun set over the Potomac, content in their private world before history calls them to their public destiny.